Hey guys, just continuing the discussion with theoretical BS on morality and God. Now in my first video I had said, as humans we recognize that some objective values exist. We are literally hardwired that way. And he responded by saying,
No we don't, and no we're not.
yes, we do, and I can prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. As promised, I'm going to be making a very science-heavy video demonstrating that in fact we are universally hardwired to recognize that some objective values exist. I'm going to be pulling all from atheistic scientists, like evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene, or evolutionary psychologist Marc Hauser in Moral Minds, and evolutionary psychologist Steven Pinker in The Blank Slate, as well as several other scholarly articles. Now I'm putting off the video for now until Sam Harris's new book, The Moral Landscape, comes out. It looks like it's going to be very relevant to the discussion. So for now, just whet y'all's appetite with a couple of quotes and then address your objections. These quotes are taken from Marc Hauser's book, Moral Minds. The point here is simple. Our moral faculty is equipped with a universal set of rules, with each culture setting up particular exceptions to these rules. All humans are endowed with the moral faculty, a capacity that enables each individual to unconsciously and automatically evaluate a limitless variety of actions in terms of principles that dictate what is permissible, obligatory, or forbidden. Our moral sense is an inevitable outcome of normal growth, no different from the growth of an arm or eye. That shows us that our moral knowledge is indeed hardwired, innate, and universal, but it's not like we actually need modern science to verify these points for us. As Thomas Jefferson pointed out in the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Now let's go ahead and look at your objections against my original claim.
Ask yourself if Hitler recognized any objective value for human life.
We are all hardwired to believe that killing a non-consenting human for entertainment is wrong, even Hitler. Let's take a look at this quote from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and then begin. The Nazi regime employed propaganda to impress upon German civilians and soldiers that Jews were not only subhuman, but also dangerous enemies of the German Reich. It's not that Hitler didn't believe this moral principle existed, or even that he didn't care about it, it's that he didn't think he was violating it. If he views Jews as subhuman, then he wouldn't think that he was killing a non-consenting human for entertainment when he kills a Jew. However, science shows us that Jews are not subhuman, and science is objective, meaning Hitler was objectively wrong. But that's not the end of it. Not only were Jews considered subhuman, but if you remember back to that quote, the Nazis didn't think that they were killing Jews for entertainment. They killed them to stop the dangerous enemies of the German Reich. Let's see your next point.
The term objective value, i.e. values that exist independently of subjects, is a self-contradictory term.
Here's the definition of value from dictionary.com. The desirability of a thing, often in respect to some property such as usefulness or exchangeability, worth, merit, or importance. Now while it's true that value can be, and often is, subjective, nothing about the definition prohibits or even implies that value cannot also be objective or inherently valuable. Now when you go on to redefine value as inherently subjective, like this,
without subjects, objects have no value.
And then you conclude that all value is subjective, like this,
this means value is necessarily subjective, always.
What you're doing is making a circular argument. My thoughts immediately go back to your first video. I'll play a little clip from it. Just replace the words right and moral with the term value.
So if you really want to degenerate into fighting over verbal real estate, if you really want to stick a flag in words like right and moral and insist that they be defined the way you want to define them, then that's cool. Obviously, I'm not talking about that then. You can have the word right. It's okay. It's just a word. I'll find some other arbitrary combination of vowels and consonants, and when you're ready to grow up and discuss things that actually matter, I'll be right here.
Alright, next you talk about biblical morality.
Take 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 23 to 24. Elisha is traveling to Bethel when some youngsters show up and poke fun at his bald head. Now Elisha asks God to do something about this, and so God sends 2 woodland bears to maul and kill 42 of this town's children. And that's the whole story. Elisha continues on his way. After that, it's never mentioned again.
Let's add a bit more information that you may have overlooked. The word you translate as children comes from this Hebrew word, and it refers to individuals between the age of 12 and 30. Elisha is God's prophet. Bethel is a town infamous for idolatry. The mob consists of over 42 young men, not merely some youngsters poking fun at him for his bald head. And it doesn't say maul and kill, it just says maul. Alright, back to you.
So let's talk about intention. Premise 1. Actions consistent with God's nature are moral, while actions inconsistent with God's nature are immoral. Premise 2. God's actions are always consistent with God's nature. Premise 3, from 1 and 2, God's actions are always moral. Premise 4. God performs the act of terminating the life of a child with the intention of punishing them for making fun of baldness. Conclusion, therefore, from 3 and 4, it is moral to terminate the life of a child with the intention of punishing them for making fun of baldness.
I disagree with your premise 4 here. God performed the act of having an angry mob mauled by a bear for the intent of punishment, to protect his prophet, bring about some greater good, or all the above. Let's look at your next argument.
Now, as it happens, you do try to make the argument that a single act can be moral when performed by God and yet immoral when performed by humans, and you attempt to do this by drawing an analogy between God and a fair-minded judge.
You claim that an action can be immoral and consistent with God's nature. I'm going to oppose that idea. This is exactly why I gave the analogy of a human judge. Now, for those who don't remember, I had said that it's acceptable for a fair-minded judge to imprison people, but not acceptable for John Doe to lock up people he finds unjust in his basement. Now, the human judge and John Doe are not on a different standard of morality. The only difference is circumstances. Think back to my original definition of morality. The relevant portion here is how best to achieve your goals. With that in mind, the judge has more resources and the ability to achieve his goal. The judge can incarcerate a criminal and bring about the greatest good for the community and succeed in that goal. John Doe, on the other hand, does not have the ability to incarcerate the criminal and bring about the greatest good for the community. He doesn't have the resources and would fail in that goal. But we can prove these two are under the same moral code because if we can make them theoretically switch positions, making John Doe become the judge and the judge become John Doe. But morality wouldn't change. Whoever is in the position of the judge would be better able to judge fairly. Now, I really want to make this point clear, so let's use one more analogy. Let's say Jane Doe drinks a beer to refresh herself. No harm, no foul. And then 6 months sober, recovering alcoholic John Doe drinks a beer to refresh himself. Now, he might not be able to handle it, and his action will cause harm. The same moral principle applies to both John and Jane here. Don't become an alcoholic. It causes harm. The only difference is that Jane is in a position that her actions would not violate that principle, where John's actions would have. Another way of saying this would be, John and Jane are held to the same objective values, but due to John's circumstances, only John's behavior is inconsistent with those values. Alright, next point. There was a short clip from my earlier video that seemed to cause some confusion, so sorry about that if I wasn't very clear the first time. Here's your original premise. And here's how I amended it. Let's look back at your original premise for a moment. Now, the reason I changed it is because God is by definition an uncreated being. So to talk about when an uncreated thing happened doesn't really make sense. Uncaused things by definition didn't happen. That which is uncreated yet exists never happened, rather it always was. I'll try and respond to the rest of your points in a later video. As always, test everything, hold on to the good.